The first day I moved in as a daughter-in-law, my mother-in-law laid down the law. I was only allowed to eat after the rest of the family had finished. I smiled and agreed. The next day, I didn't cook a thing and said something that left her speechless. Our wedding night, before the warmth and passion had even faded, my mother-in-law, Helen, coldly tossed an oppressive, leather-bound book onto our bed. The Davenport Family Codex. To be a daughter in this house, she stated, her voice as crisp as a winter morning, is to understand one's place. And yours is at the bottom. When dinner is served, you will stand and wait for your elders to eat. Only after the table is cleared may you eat what remains. My new husband, Michael, bowed his head in spineless acquiescence. Helen waited triumphantly for the sobs of a newlywed bride's broken spirit. But they were mistaken. I didn't cry. I smiled and agreed instantly. And so it was that the following morning, the prestigious Davenport family would discover the terrifying cost of a chief financial officer using absolute obedience as a weapon. The price wasn't just rumbling, empty stomachs, but the complete collapse of an archaic, authoritarian empire. The last of the champagne corks had been popped, and the faint, elegant scent of potpourri still lingered in the historic brownstone on Boston's Beacon Hill. Eleanor, a woman accustomed to the stark, unforgiving numbers of corporate finance, had officially entered the Davenport family as Michael's wife. The wedding had been a lavish affair at the Boston Harbor Hotel. Every guest had praised Michael for choosing a wife who was not only beautiful but also accomplished and sharp. Deep down, however, I knew that my life as a daughter-in-law in an old-money, blue-blooded Boston family, with its layers of unspoken rules and rigid etiquette, would be no walk in the park. Our master suite was exquisitely decorated with crimson silk sheets and pillows embroidered with a regal family crest. Michael took my hand, his eyes weary from a long day of greeting guests, yet still filled with affection. "This is our sanctuary now, Ellie," he whispered. "I'll always protect you. I'll always love you." But before the warmth from his hand could fully spread, a sharp, dry knock echoed at the door. It opened to reveal Helen, my mother-in-law. She still wore the elegant navy blue Chanel suit from the ceremony, her face meticulously powdered, but her sharp eyes couldn't hide a look of stern authority, if not outright oppression. In her hand was not a wedding gift or a congratulatory card, but a worn, black leather-bound book. Helen gracefully seated herself in a mahogany armchair beside the vanity, gesturing for us to sit. Her voice was low but firm, each word landing with the weight of a gavel. "You two are now officially husband and wife. The Davenport family has always been built on a foundation of order and a clear hierarchy. Eleanor, you are now a daughter of this house, and though you are family, you must understand our ways." This book contains the articles every Davenport daughter-in-law must commit to memory. I glanced at Michael and saw him lower his head slightly, a look of resignation on his face. I smiled faintly, maintaining the most respectful demeanor I could muster. "Of course, Helen, I'm new to this and have much to learn. Please, guide me so I can be the best daughter I can be." Helen flipped through the yellowed pages, her voice a monotone drone of authority as she began to read. There were rules about posture, about how to properly address distant relatives, about the specific china to be used for holidays. I listened, thinking to myself that these were merely the quirks of a family steeped in tradition. However, when she reached the final chapter, the atmosphere in the room turned ice. Helen looked directly into my eyes, emphasizing each word. "And the most important article, the most inviolable rule of this household, pertains to meals, be they daily dinners or holiday feasts. You, as the newest daughter-in-law, hold the lowest rank. Therefore, you are absolutely forbidden from sitting at the table while your elders are dining. You will wait until your husband and I have finished our meal. After you have cleared the table completely, you may then eat whatever is left. This is how we cultivate patience and respect in our juniors." Michael flinched. "Mom," he stammered, "it's the 21st century. How can we still have a rule like that? Ellie works a demanding job all day. To make her wait like that, it's cruel." Helen's eyes flashed at her son. "You will be silent, Michael. This is our family codex, not a negotiation. When I married your father, your grandmother made me wait until nearly midnight to eat. It taught me my place and instilled in me the discipline that has maintained this family's dignity. Eleanor, what do you have to say?" I looked from the codex to the triumphant smirk on my mother-in-law's face. As a CFO, I was trained to analyze and defuse hostile takeovers, and I immediately recognized this for what it was, a power play. If I cried or protested now, I would be branded the disrespectful, rebellious wife, giving her endless ammunition to oppress me. But if I agreed, I would have my own weapon. I took a deep breath, my face unnervingly calm, and lowered my head slightly. Helen, your words are full of wisdom. I understand you want what's best for me. To help me cultivate the virtues of a Davenport woman, I will adhere to the family codex absolutely. Starting tomorrow, I will do exactly as you have instructed. Helen seemed slightly taken aback by my swift capitulation. She cleared her throat, snapped the book shut, and stood up. It's good that you understand. Now, you two get some rest. We have breakfast at 8 a.m. sharp. Remember your place. The door clicked shut. Michael rushed to my side, his voice thick with guilt. Ellie, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she would be this extreme. Let me talk to her. I can't let you be treated this way. I gently patted his hand, a glint of intelligence in my eyes. Don't worry, Mike. I have my own way of handling this. I'm a numbers person, remember? I know how to balance budgets, assets, liabilities, and leverage. Just let your mother have her way. You're about to see just how interesting this new rule can be. On my first night as a married woman, I lay in my husband's arms, but my mind was already drafting a strategy. A strategy where I would use the very chains my mother-in-law had just placed around my neck to ensnare her in a situation she could never have anticipated. The next morning's sunrise would mark the beginning of a new campaign, where modern female ingenuity would confront archaic prejudice with the most deceptively gentle demeanor. The alarm on my phone chimed at precisely 6:30 a.m. I sprang out of bed, feeling the early Boston chill seep through the window panes. As was my routine, I selected a sharp business suit, applied my makeup with light but meticulous care, and instead of rushing to the kitchen like a dutiful new daughter-in-law, I sat leisurely at my vanity, perfecting my eyeliner and spritzing on a subtle Chanel perfume. At 8 a.m. on the dot, I descended to the dining room. Helen was already seated at the head of the table, her face a mask of impatience. Michael was there too, anxiously fiddling with the French press. Seeing me, he called out, Ellie, come on, get into the kitchen and start breakfast. Mom's waiting. Helen cleared her throat, glancing from the grandfather clock to me with a scrutinizing gaze. A new bride. And this is the time you decide to show your face? Get in the kitchen and whip up some omelets or something. Quickly, so we can all get to work. I stood on the bottom step of the grand staircase, smiling brightly, but my feet remained planted. I crossed my arms, my voice gentle, but carrying clearly across the room. Good morning, Helen. I remember your lesson from last night perfectly. You said, as the junior member, I am not to touch the dining table or any food before my elders have finished their meal. I've thought it over, and if I were to go into the kitchen to cook, I would inevitably have to touch the plates, the utensils, the food meant for you and Michael. That would be a grave act of disrespect. I would never dare to defy your direct instruction. Helen froze, the fork in her hand trembling slightly. She narrowed her eyes. So, you intend to let your husband and me starve? I replied instantly, my voice still syrupy sweet. Oh, not at all. I am simply fulfilling my duty as you defined it. Since I am not permitted to touch your food, I cannot possibly cook for you. I will respectfully wait until you and Michael have either gone out for breakfast or prepared something for yourselves. Once the table is clear and the kitchen is empty, I will then venture in to prepare my own meal. Michael stood there, dumbfounded, nearly spilling his coffee. He looked from me to his mother, utterly speechless. Helen's face turned a shade of crimson. She slammed her hand on the table. Are you using this twisted logic to get out of your household duties? She seethed. I said you would eat after us, not that you wouldn't cook. I maintained my calm, patiently explaining, Helen, in the codex you read to me, it states I am not to sit at the table while my elders are dining. To cook a meal properly, one must taste it for seasoning. Yes, I would be tasting the food before you, or at the very least, handling it before you. As a new daughter-in-law, I must uphold the traditions of this family. I don't want the relatives to whisper that I have no respect for hierarchy. Tasting the food before my mother-in-law has even touched her fork. With that, I glanced at my watch and casually picked up my briefcase. Well, it's almost time for me to head to the office. Please, you and Michael help yourselves. Whenever you're finished eating, just leave the dishes. I'll take care of them and eat my portion when I get home this evening. If you'll excuse me. I walked out, leaving a stunned Helen in my wake. I could hear her ragged breathing and Michael calling my name, but I didn't look back. As I stepped out onto the cobblestone street, I felt a strange sense of liberation. I had no desire to be disrespectful, but I knew that if I didn't establish a clear boundary from day one, I would be dragged into a vortex of irrational subjugation. At my downtown office, I ordered a premium breakfast from a nearby cafe, a fresh croissant, and a hot latte. Sitting in my climate-controlled office, I savored my meal, a stark contrast to the vision Helen had of me huddled in a corner, eating cold leftovers. I knew this was only the beginning. A woman like Helen, who had spent her entire life basking in the glow of feigned authority and being waited on, wouldn't give up easily. But she had forgotten one crucial detail. She had set the rules. I was merely the one executing them with the mechanical precision of an auditor. In accounting, one wrong number can throw off an entire balance sheet. And in this household, I would not allow myself to be off by a single decimal point in her ridiculous codex. On the second day after the wedding, a dreadful silence hung over the Beacon Hill brownstone. Normally, in a traditional household, this hour would be filled with the sounds of a sizzling pan, running water, and the aroma of brewing coffee. But today, the Davenport kitchen was as cold and silent as a tomb. I woke up at my usual time, leisurely completing my skincare routine. I examined my reflection in the mirror, my face bright and free of any worry. When I went downstairs, I found Helen on the living room sofa, holding the Boston Globe but staring intently toward the kitchen. Michael sat beside her, looking agitated, his eyes darting toward the staircase every few seconds. Seeing me descend, Helen couldn't contain her irritation. Her voice dripped with sarcasm. "Well, Miss Eleanor, do you plan on letting this house starve again today? I let it slide yesterday, assuming you were tired from the wedding. But are you going to continue this little performance of the junior who can't touch the dishes?" I calmly walked over and greeted her with the utmost politeness. "Good morning, Helen. I explained my position yesterday. This isn't a performance. It's my earnest attempt to be a proper daughter-in-law. Last night, I took the liberty of rereading the family codex you so kindly lent me. On page 12, it explicitly states that the daughter-in-law must preserve the sanctity of the elder's meal. I concluded that since my hands are not yet purified by a morning ritual of devotion, my touching the pots and pans would taint your food. As the one with the lowest standing, I must wait until you and Michael have eaten before I dare enter the kitchen to see to my own needs." Helen slammed the newspaper down and shot to her feet. "Don't you dare twist my words. Do you expect me, at my age, to cook meals for you to eat later?" I replied gently, my voice as level as if I were delivering a quarterly earnings report. "No, of course not. I would never ask you to cook for me. You and Michael should feel free to cook for yourselves, or perhaps Michael could pick something up from the cafe down the street. As for me, I've already told you, I will eat later. And since I'm eating later, I don't need anyone to worry about me. I have my own arrangements." Michael stood up, taking my hand, his voice pleading. "Ellie, please, stop this. Mom is getting older. Can't you just yield a little? It's just breakfast. What's the big deal?" I looked directly into his eyes, my voice firm. "Michael, you asked me to yield to your mother, but I am obeying your mother. She is the one who created the eat later rule. If I go into the kitchen to cook now, I'll have to taste the food to see if it's seasoned correctly. That means I'll have eaten before her. Do you want me to be the kind of daughter-in-law who disrespects her mother-in-law by tasting the food before she does? You have to understand my position. I'm trying my best to be the perfect daughter-in-law, according to your family's codex." Helen was so furious, she was speechless, her face flushed. She had never encountered an opponent who could so deftly use her own weapons against her with such disarming politeness. She turned to Michael. "Fine. Don't waste your breath on her. We'll see how long she can keep this up. Let's go out for breakfast. I refuse to believe this house will fall apart without her." Helen clattered into her shoes and dragged Michael out the door. I stood in the living room, watching their figures disappear behind the wrought iron gate, and then allowed myself a small smile. I went to the kitchen, carefully avoiding contact with any of Helen's plates or glasses. I opened the refrigerator, took out a carton of almond milk I had bought the night before, and poured it into a personal glass I had brought from my own apartment. I sat down on the plush sofa, sipped my milk, and continued reading the novel I had started. The silence was magnificent. I wasn't slaving over a hot stove, nor was I enduring criticism about unevenly chopped onions or bland coffee. I was enjoying my freedom within the very cage Helen had constructed for me. I knew that in this war, whoever lost their composure first would lose. Helen was already simmering. And I had an abundance of patience. I would show her that respect doesn't come from irrational, imposed rules, but from understanding and equality. If she wanted me to be a subordinate, I would be the most absolute, thorough subordinate she had ever seen, to the point where she could no longer stand my subordination. That evening, I returned from work a little later than usual. The moment I stepped inside, I was hit by an oppressive, gloomy atmosphere and the pungent smell of instant ramen wafting from the kitchen. It seemed that after a full day of my strike, my mother-in-law and husband had resorted to the quickest solution to fill their stomachs. Helen was sitting at the dining table, an empty, broth-stained ramen bowl in front of her. She glared at me, her voice strained with anger. "Eleanor, you're quite something. You disappear all day and leave your mother-in-law at home to eat instant noodles. Do you have any conscience left? Where is your sense of duty as a wife, as a daughter-in-law?" I set down my briefcase, calmly took off my heels, and approached the table. I showed no fear or remorse. On the contrary, my face was filled with concern. "Oh, Helen, why are you eating instant ramen? Where is Michael? How could he let you eat something so unhealthy? I assumed he would have taken you to a nice restaurant or ordered some gourmet takeout for you." Helen slammed her hand on the table. "Don't you dare blame Michael. He got home late from work, and I was too tired to go anywhere. You are the daughter-in-law. You are responsible for the meals. What was all that nonsense about not daring to touch the elders' dishes? It's just an excuse for your laziness, a way to torment this old woman, isn't it?" I sighed softly and sat down in a chair opposite her at a respectable, rule-abiding distance from her place setting. Of course, I looked her in the eye, my voice becoming low and confidential. "Helen, you're misjudging me terribly. I'm not lazy. I work hard all day at the firm, you know. But I have etched your words into my mind. The junior must not touch the table while the elders are dining. If I were to cook and set the table, and accidentally touch your plate before you'd eaten, I'd be guilty of disrespect. You told me I must wait until you're finished and the table is cleared before I can eat. So, are you finished now? If you're done and the table is clean, then I can finally go into the kitchen and prepare my own meal." Helen was choked with indignation. She wanted to yell, but she realized she was caught in a logic trap of her own making. She stammered, "Well, just cook. I never said you couldn't cook for me." I shook my head, my expression firm. "I can't do that, Helen. There must be a proper order to things. If I cook for you, I have to handle the food. I have to taste it. I have to prepare it. That means I would be participating in the elders' meal when, according to your rules, I am not yet qualified to do so. What if, later, you accuse me of being a daughter-in-law with no manners, of daring to stand equal with you in the kitchen? I would be mortified. I would rather go hungry, rather be called lazy by you, than be known as an ill-bred woman who disrespects the ancestral traditions of the Davenport family." My words were like a bucket of ice water thrown in her face. She was stunned for a few seconds, her mouth agape, unable to utter a word. Her own arguments about a daughter-in-law's duty were now a barrier preventing her from receiving any service from me. Just then, Michael walked in. Seeing the tense atmosphere, he tried to intervene. "Mom? Ellie, please, can we all just calm down? I'll go out and buy some takeout for everyone." I smiled at my husband. "Just buy for yourself and your mother, dear. I've already ordered my own dinner. It will be delivered shortly. I'll eat in the kitchen corner after you and Helen are finished. As the codex dictates, I wouldn't want to intrude upon the sophisticated meal of my elders." With that, I stood up and went upstairs, leaving Helen sitting there with her cold, soggy ramen and the bitter taste of defeat slowly spreading through her. I knew she would have a sleepless night. She was beginning to realize that the power she had so proudly wielded was becoming a set of shackles, binding her own comfortable life. And I, her obedient daughter-in-law, was the one holding the key, but I refused to unlock it because I was too busy following the rules. By the third morning, the situation had not improved for Helen. After a night of stewing, she had apparently decided that a tougher stance would make me fold. She woke up very early, deliberately making loud noises in the kitchen, hoping my anxiety or fear would drive me downstairs to apologize. But I remained as calm as a placid lake. I rose at my usual 6:30, applying my makeup even more beautifully than the days before. When I came downstairs, I saw Helen at the dining table with a plate of store-bought pastries from the corner bakery. They looked cold and dry. Michael sat beside her, looking miserable, poking at a piece of scone with his fork. Seeing me, Helen tilted her chin. Well, look at this. This house has become a hotel. Mother-in-law and daughter-in-law going their separate ways. Meals are a disaster. Are you satisfied now? I approached, my expression one of alarm. Goodness, Helen, why are you eating store-bought pastries? Michael, why didn't you wake up early and make your mother some oatmeal? She's not young anymore. Food from outside can upset her stomach. Michael sighed. I don't know how to cook anything, Ellie. You won't cook, and Mom refuses to go into the kitchen. I cut him off, my voice full of feigned remorse but incredibly sharp. Helen, I'm so sorry. I desperately want to cook for you, but I'm afraid. I'm terrified of that family codex. You told me I am the lowest-ranking daughter-in-law and must eat last. I've thought and thought about it. If I were to make a large pot roast, for example, and you ate first while I ate later, the gravy would be diminished, the meat less fresh. That would mean I'm either getting your leftovers or forcing you to share a pan with me. I find that deeply disrespectful. So, I've made a decision. To preserve your dignity, I will never cook from the same pot or use the same dishes as you again. Helen slammed the table. Stop that sarcastic tone. Are you trying to tear this family apart with your ridiculous logic? I looked at her. My eyes suddenly filled with sincerity. I'm not being sarcastic. I'm speaking from the heart. You wanted me to know my place. I know it now. My place is not to touch your dinner plate. So, I will adhere to that completely. From now on, I will manage my own food. You and Michael can manage yours. That way, your meals will always be pristine and sanctified, undisturbed by this low-ranking daughter-in-law. Just as I finished speaking, the doorbell rang. I answered it to find a delivery driver with a fragrant bag of food. I brought it inside and placed it on the kitchen counter, a separate counter, far from Helen's dining table. The rich aroma of a steak and eggs breakfast with home fries filled the room, overpowering the sad, stale smell of the pastries on Helen's plate. Helen looked from my takeout bag to her plate of dry scones, her face pale with a mixture of anger and, perhaps, envy. She was realizing that while she was using the codex to force me to eat scraps, I was using it to eat better than she was. I leisurely opened my food containers, took out a knife and fork, and began to enjoy my breakfast right there at the kitchen island. I didn't offer any to her or Michael. The reason was simple. I wouldn't dare offer the food of a subordinate to my elders. It might bring you bad fortune. Michael looked at me, his eyes showing helplessness mixed with a grudging respect. As for Helen, she sat there, the scone in her mouth suddenly turning to ash. She was beginning to understand that her authority was being eroded by her daughter-in-law's terrifying obedience. In this battle, I hadn't used a single curse word or committed a single disrespectful act. I only used what she had given me, and I knew this was the first lesson she had to learn. Respect is built on love, not on antiquated dogma. I would continue to be this obedient until she realized that her precious codex was the very wall separating her from a truly happy family. Take your time, Helen, I called out while savoring a juicy piece of steak. I'll wait until you're finished to clear your dishes. I'm a good daughter-in-law. After all, don't you worry. Helen said nothing. She stood up, leaving her pastry unfinished, and marched to her room, slamming the door behind her. Michael and I looked at each other. He just shook his head, and I knew I had just won another round in this battle of wits. After 3 days of tense confrontation, the air in the Beacon Hill brownstone was as thick as lead. Michael, a gentleman made meek by a lifetime under Helen's formidable shadow, was trapped between his mother, who worshipped feudalistic etiquette, and his sharp-witted wife, who refused to be bullied. That evening, as I was reviewing financial reports in our room, Michael entered, his face haggard and his eyes sunken from lack of sleep. He sat down next to me, took my hand, and let out a long, heavy sigh. His voice was low, pleading. Ellie, I know Mom was out of line with that codex on our wedding night. But look at us. This doesn't feel like a home anymore. She's old, she's stubborn. You're the daughter-in-law. Can't you just give in a little? What's the harm? I set the documents down and turned to face him directly. My eyes held no anger, only a cold, clear-headed rationality. I turned the question back on him. What do you mean, give in? Have I disobeyed her in any way? Have I violated a single article in the codex she gave me? Michael fidgeted. Well, no, you're following her words, but you're being so extreme about it. She said to eat after her, but she didn't mean you couldn't cook for the family. You could just cook a normal dinner, wait for us to finish, and then have your meal. That way, we'd have peace, and you'd still be fulfilling your duty. A bitter, faint smile touched my lips, a smile of disappointment in the man I had married. Michael, you make it sound so simple. If I cook, I have to taste the seasonings, I have to plate the food. Your mother would then accuse me of being presumptuous, of touching the food before my elders. Don't you see? She doesn't want me to cook. She wants me to submit, to accept a subservient role in this house. I am giving her exactly what she asked for, so she can see how absurd her rules are. Don't tell me to give in, because I've done nothing wrong that requires concession. Michael was losing his patience. He stood and paced the room. But look at her. Ellie. She's eating instant ramen and stale pastries. She's going to make herself sick. You're a CFO. You manage hundreds of people. Why can't you be a little more diplomatic at home for the sake of peace? I'm caught in the middle of this, and I'm exhausted. I rose and walked over to him, adjusting the collar of his shirt. My voice remained soft, but it was now laced with steel. You're exhausted because you refuse to face the truth. The truth is, your mother is using archaic traditions to bully her daughter-in-law, and you want your wife to endure that bullying so that you can have peace. Michael, I married you because I love you, but I did not marry you to become a slave to 19th century ideals. I am following your mother's rules. Why are you blaming me? If you feel so bad for her, why don't you go into the kitchen and cook her a meal yourself? Or do you also believe that cooking is a woman's job, and a low-ranking woman at that? Michael was speechless. He looked at me as if I were a stranger. Perhaps he never imagined that a woman who appeared so elegant and gentle could possess such sharp, unyielding logic. He couldn't argue with me, because every word I spoke was based on the very codex Helen herself had written. He dropped his arms in defeat and silently walked out of the room. Watching his retreating back, my heart ached a little, but I knew I couldn't afford to be soft. If I compromised today, I would spend the rest of my life bowing my head in my own home. This wasn't just a fight over dinner. It was a fight for my dignity and for equality within my marriage. The next evening, after a stressful day at the investment firm, I decided to treat myself. I stopped at a high-end market and bought 2 beautiful, fresh lobsters, some unsalted butter, garlic, and a bottle of crisp white wine. When I got home, I found Helen and Michael at the dining table with a single, sad-looking dish of oversalted tuna casserole and a bowl of wilted, boiled green beans. I greeted them politely and walked calmly into the kitchen. As per the codex, I waited. I leaned against the refrigerator, placidly observing them as they ate. Helen kept shooting daggers at me with her eyes. At one point, she deliberately took a large bite of the casserole and said loudly, "A simple, salty dish like this is what a real family eats. Not like that fancy foreign food that just makes you fat." I smiled and said nothing. The moment they put down their forks, I sprang into action. I waited for Helen to leave the table and go to the living room to watch her evening television shows. Only then did I enter the kitchen. I didn't use the house china. I used a set of personal cookware and dishes I had bought for myself. The rich, fragrant scent of garlic sizzling and butter soon filled the entire house, wafting into the living room and up the stairs. The decadent aroma of lobster in a garlic butter sauce made the gloomy atmosphere feel suddenly alive. I heard the volume on the TV in the living room get lower, replaced by the sound of Helen clearing her throat repeatedly. I leisurely arranged the bright red, glistening lobsters on a plate at the kitchen island. I didn't sit at the main dining table where she had just eaten, but stood at the kitchen's breakfast bar to eat. Each firm, sweet bite of lobster, combined with the richness of the butter and the punch of garlic, was pure bliss. Helen couldn't take it anymore. She stormed into the kitchen, her hands on her hips. "Eleanor, what is the meaning of this? You buy this extravagant food and stand here eating it all by yourself. Have you no shame? You have a mother-in-law and a husband in this house, and you can't even offer them a single bite?" I put down my fork, wiped my mouth with a napkin, and looked at her with the most innocent expression I could muster. "But Helen, you taught me that the junior member cannot touch the elder's food, nor can we sit at the same table. I figured my food is just common, store-bought fare, of an even lower status. How could I dare offer this humble lobster to you? You are an elder. A simple, traditional dish like tuna casserole is befitting of your dignified character. If I offered you this rich food, and it gave you indigestion or raised your blood pressure, I could never forgive myself. I am doing this to maintain the proper hierarchy and to protect your health." Helen was dumbstruck, her eyes glued to the half-eaten lobster on my plate. She loved fine dining, but her own pride and the rules she had established had cut off her own path to enjoyment. She pointed a trembling finger at me. You are a selfish woman. Are you using my son's money to live lavishly by yourself? I replied calmly, Helen, this was paid for with my salary as a CFO. I haven't spent a single one of Michael's dollars since I moved in. And since I'm eating separately according to your rules, I figured my finances should also be separate, so you don't have to worry about me being a drain on the family. I eat my share. You eat yours. It's the fairest way, isn't it? Helen turned in a huff and stomped upstairs, her footsteps thundering on the wooden staircase. I looked at my plate of lobster, then toward the living room where Michael sat, head bowed in silence. It was a delicious meal, but my heart was unsettled. I didn't want to live like this forever. But if Helen refused to change, I would be dining exquisitely alone for a long time to come. On Sunday morning, as the sun cast long shadows across the brick sidewalks of Beacon Hill, Helen decided to launch a full-scale assault. She summoned both Michael and me to the living room. In her hand was the now infamous family codex. Her face was a thundercloud of fury, her thin lips pressed into a hard, straight line. She slammed the book onto the coffee table with a loud crack that echoed through the silent room. I have called you here to make things perfectly clear. Eleanor, you have been a daughter-in-law in this house for 1 week, and your actions have pushed me beyond my limits. You use my family's codex as an excuse to torment your mother-in-law and shirk your responsibilities. Look around. Has this kitchen been warm a single day since you arrived? You treat this house like a hotel, coming and going as you please, ordering extravagant meals for one, while your family starves. What kind of person are you? I maintain my composure, sitting with my back straight, my hands folded in my lap. Helen, I have listened to and executed every instruction you gave me on our wedding night. You told me to eat later. I have eaten later. You told me not to touch the dining table while my elders were eating. I have not dared to transgress. You told me I am the newest, lowest-ranking daughter-in-law. I have never once tried to sit as your equal. I fail to understand what I have done wrong to make you so angry. Helen shrieked, Don't you dare play innocent with that silver tongue. My meaning was that you were to cook for us and then eat what was left over. Not that you were to leave us to fend for ourselves while you feast. You are the daughter-in-law. You are to care for your husband and mother-in-law before you care for yourself. I sighed softly, my face a mask of contemplation. Helen, you instructed me that as the junior, I cannot touch the elders' food. If I cook, I must taste it, which means I would eat before you. And if I touch your plates, I am being disrespectful. I thought about it long and hard, and the only way to avoid breaking your rules while preserving your dignity was for each of us to be responsible for our own meals. You told me to eat separately. So, how could I dare to eat from the same pot as you? I am doing this out of my immense respect for you. Helen was past her breaking point. She stood and pointed at my face. You get out of this house. Now. The Davenport family has no place for a disrespectful daughter-in-law who uses logic to oppress her mother-in-law. Michael finally jumped up, horrified. Mom, calm down. She was just trying to follow your rules. We can talk this out. Why are you kicking her out? I stood up, showing no fear or panic. I looked at Helen calmly. If you want me to leave, I will leave immediately. But before I go, I want to ask you one question. Did you create this codex to build a happy family, or to create a prison for your daughter-in-law? If you wanted an unpaid servant who would obey without question, you chose the wrong person. But if you wanted a daughter-in-law who is respectful but also has self-respect, then you need to reconsider your codex. I will go pack my things. I turned and walked away, my heart feeling surprisingly light. I knew I had done nothing wrong. Michael's weakness and Helen's tyranny had made this house suffocating. If leaving was the price of my dignity, I was willing to pay it. But I had a strong feeling Helen wouldn't let me go that easily. She had forgotten about one crucial aspect of this game, the financials. As I was packing my clothes into a suitcase, Michael ran in. He hugged me from behind, his voice desperate. Ellie, don't go. Mom was just angry. I'm begging you, please stay. I'll talk to her again. I gently removed his hands and turned to face him. Michael, the issue isn't about staying or leaving. It's about equality. You see how she treats me, like a wild animal that needs to be tamed. I can't live like this. But, for you, I will stay. On one condition. From now on, things are going to be different. I went back downstairs, not with a suitcase, but with a single sheet of paper. I sat down opposite Helen, who was now sitting forlornly in the living room. My professional CFO voice filled the room. Helen, after careful consideration, I've concluded that living together under these separate and unequal conditions is both emotionally draining and financially inefficient. Since I am eating separately and am forbidden from using the common kitchen to serve you, I propose a change to my financial contribution to this household. Effective this month. Helen looked up, her expression wary. What are you planning? I laid out my proposal. Previously, Michael and I agreed to contribute $2,000 a month to you for household expenses. However, since I do not eat the household's food or use its general supplies, that amount is no longer logical. I've done the calculations. From now on, I will contribute only for my share of the utilities, electricity, water, and internet which, based on an equitable division, comes to $300 a month. The remainder I will keep to cover my own food and personal expenses. Michael will contribute his share, and you will cover yours. This is a fair and transparent system that aligns with the separate eating policy you've established. Helen's face went white. Her pension was modest, and she had always relied on Michael's income, and now, my expected contribution to maintain her lifestyle. The loss of that significant sum was a brutal blow. You'd be that. Calculating? She stammered. And what about my labor, managing this house? I smiled. Helen, you manage the house for yourself and Michael. I haven't troubled you at all. I buy my own food. I wash my own separate set of dishes. And I clean my own room. I believe $300 is more than generous for my usage. You taught me to know my place, and in doing so, I must also protect my own finances for my and Michael's future. Helen shot a desperate look at Michael, hoping he would intervene. But he just looked down, knowing that if he tried to force me to pay more, I would walk out the door that very instant. Helen's anger was now eclipsed by financial anxiety. She realized her authority couldn't fill her depleting bank account. Grudgingly, she took the $300 I placed on the table without another word. I knew I had struck a powerful blow against her greatest weaknesses, her pride and her wallet. A life of equality requires not just sound logic, but also economic leverage. And I, a chief financial officer, would never let myself get the short end of the deal when it came to the numbers. After several days of subsisting on instant ramen, takeout, and her own stubbornness, Helen's health began to decline. Her chronic gastritis flared up, leaving her clutching her stomach and wincing in pain all afternoon. Michael was at work late, leaving no one but me to look after her. On Wednesday afternoon, I came home from work early. As I entered the house, I saw Helen in the kitchen, trying to wash some vegetables, but her hands were trembling and her face was pale. Seeing me, she lost her usual haughty demeanor, merely glancing at me before turning back to her task. I calmly walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and leaned against the door frame, watching her. Helen, I said, my voice filled with a delicate concern. Why are you in the kitchen? You're not well. You should be resting. Helen let out a ragged breath. If I don't cook, what will we eat? Michael is working late tonight. Am I supposed to let him starve? And as for you, well, I wouldn't dare trouble you. I walked closer, looking at the vegetables she was struggling with. You're not preparing those correctly. They're too tough. You need to trim them more, or they'll just aggravate your stomach. Here, let me show you. I stood beside her and pointed at the vegetables, but I made absolutely sure not to touch them myself. I was still upholding my promise. The junior does not touch the elder's food. You are so capable, Helen, I praised. At your age, still personally seeing to your son's meals. Michael is so lucky. I'm just in awe watching you work. If I tried to help, I'm so clumsy I'd probably ruin your dinner. And then I'd feel terrible. Helen looked up at me, her eyes filled with exhaustion and something that looked like a silent plea hidden beneath her pride. Her voice trembled. Eleanor, could you just help me with dinner tonight? I'm so tired. I don't think I can stand much longer. I smiled, a gentle but unyielding smile. Helen, I want to help you. I truly do. But I'm too afraid. Remember the codex? If I touch your pots and pans now, tomorrow when you're feeling better, you'll accuse me of taking advantage of your weakness to usurp your kitchen. I would rather you struggle a little today than cause you distress over my lack of proper upbringing. You can do it. You're almost there. With that, I went upstairs to take a shower, leaving Helen standing alone in the cold, silent kitchen. I knew I was being cruel, but this cruelty was necessary for her to understand the value of support. She had always seen a daughter-in-law's cooking as an obligation, a favor she was bestowing by allowing me to serve her. Now, she had to learn that, when she stripped away equality, she also stripped away her right to be helped. That night, Michael came home to find his mother collapsed on the sofa and the kitchen in a state of disarray. He rushed upstairs to find me, his voice accusatory. Ellie, you saw she was sick. Why didn't you help her? You've gone too far. I looked at him calmly. I stood by her side the entire time, offering encouragement and instruction. What more did you want me to do? Touch her food and get yelled at for overstepping? I am preserving the etiquette of your family. If you're so worried about her, then you need to arrange your work schedule to come home earlier and cook for her. Don't blame me when your mother is the one who has forbidden me from touching her food. Michael fell silent. He was realizing that in this house, the rules were now tormenting the very people who created them. And I remained the world's most obedient daughter-in-law, because I was following the codex down to the last comma. After weeks of this Cold War, a new energy entered the Beacon Hill brownstone. Not the warmth of family, but the dawn of a new scheme from Helen. On Saturday morning, as I was sipping my jasmine tea by the window, Helen entered the living room with an unusually serene air. She was wearing a silk blouse the color of buttercups, a calculated smile on her lips. She sat down, tapping her fingers on the antique table. Eleanor, she announced, you've been a Davenport daughter for some time now. In 2 weeks, we will be hosting the annual Thanksgiving dinner. It is the most important gathering of the year for our family. In the past, I've always managed everything. But this year, with a new daughter-in-law in the house, I want you to take charge of the entire affair. It's time to show the family how capable you are. I set down my teacup, doing a quick calculation in my head. This was it, her final gambit. I smiled politely. Of course, Helen. Thanksgiving is a sacred tradition, and as a daughter-in-law, I must do my part. But you haven't forgotten the codex, have you? I am the junior. If I am in charge of the feast, touching the ceremonial turkey and the dishes for all the family elders, I'm afraid they'll reprimand me for not knowing my place. You are the matriarch. Your reputation in this family is immense. I wouldn't dare overstep. Helen waved her hand dismissively, a glint of cunning in her eyes. Don't worry about that. Thanksgiving is a special occasion. I am officially granting you full authority in the kitchen. You will showcase your talents and prepare a feast that will make your husband and me proud. You're a CFO. You're brilliant with planning. I'm sure a few turkeys won't be a challenge for you. This is also your chance to atone for the recent unpleasantness. You understand my meaning, don't you? I understood perfectly. She was planning to use the court of public opinion, the extended family, to force me into servitude. If I succeeded, she would take the credit for having trained such a capable daughter-in-law. If I failed or refused, she would have the perfect opportunity to paint me as lazy and disrespectful in front of everyone. I nodded gently. If you're entrusting this to me, Helen, then I accept. I will prepare a Thanksgiving the family will never forget. You just rest and prepare to be a gracious hostess. That's all you need to worry about. Michael, standing nearby, was overjoyed. He thought this was a sign of a truce. That's fantastic. Ellie, if you need help with the shopping, just let me know. I looked at my husband, the mysterious smile returning to my lips. No need to worry, dear. I know exactly what I need to do to uphold my station as a daughter-in-law who respects tradition, just as Helen has always wanted. For the next 2 weeks, I went about my life as usual. I left for work early and came home late. Helen, seeing no signs of grocery shopping, turkey ordering, or any other preparations, started to get antsy. Every evening, she would ask, Eleanor, how are the Thanksgiving plans coming along? Do you need the number for my butcher? My reply was always calm. Everything is under control, Helen. I have a plan. I'm a finance person, remember? Everything is proceeding according to a very specific timeline. On Thanksgiving Day, you'll see that nothing has been overlooked. In reality, I hadn't ordered a single dish. I hadn't bought a single pound of potatoes or a can of cranberries. The only things I brought home the day before Thanksgiving were 2 enormous bouquets of autumn chrysanthemums and a set of elegant, tall candles, which I arranged beautifully on the mantelpiece. Helen went into the kitchen and saw the empty refrigerator and spotless counters. There was no scent of spices, no evidence of any cooking preparation. Panic began to set in. She rushed to my room. Eleanor, Thanksgiving is tomorrow. Why is there not a single item of food in this house? Do you plan to do all the shopping tomorrow morning? How will you possibly cook a feast for 30 people in a few hours? I was calmly filing my nails, my voice sweet. Helen, I told you I would prepare a very special Thanksgiving. Have you forgotten your own teaching? I am the junior and cannot touch the elder's meal. If I start cooking tonight, the smell of food will fill the house. I'll have to taste things. I would be disrespecting the sanctity of the holiday before it even begins. I have a surprise for you tomorrow morning. You just get a good night's sleep so you look beautiful for our guests. Helen was skeptical, but, seeing my confidence, she reassured herself that I must have hired a caterer. Whatever you're planning, if you embarrass me in front of this family tomorrow, I will not let you hear the end of it, she grumbled before retreating to her room. I watched her go, a small smile playing on my lips. The surprise I have for you, I whispered to myself, is one you will remember for the rest of your life. In this game, whoever controls the rules wins. And I was about to show her just how wonderfully effective her rules could be when applied to a formal family gathering. Early on Thanksgiving morning, the Beacon Hill brownstone was buzzing with activity. Aunts and uncles arrived from Cape Cod, cousins drove in from Connecticut. Helen, dressed in a regal, plum-colored cashmere dress and pearls, greeted her guests with a radiant smile. "Yes, we have a new daughter-in-law this year," she announced to anyone who would listen. "She's so capable. She insisted on handling the entire dinner herself to give me a break. Just make yourselves comfortable. The feast will be ready soon." The Davenport relatives, known for being particularly discerning, nodded in approval. "Well, you've done well for yourself, Helen. To have trained a new daughter-in-law so perfectly is a blessing." By 11 a.m., the living room was packed. The conversation was lively, but a strange sense of anticipation hung in the air. There were no sounds from the kitchen, no smell of roasting turkey or baking pies. Michael paced nervously. I, dressed in a chic but conservative dress, moved gracefully through the crowd, offering drinks and making pleasant conversation. At noon, the family patriarch, Uncle Robert, looked at his watch and turned to Helen. "Helen, my dear, it's nearly time to say grace and carve the turkey. I don't see any preparations. Where is your new daughter-in-law? Tell her it's time to start bringing out the food." Beads of sweat began to form on Helen's brow. She rushed to the kitchen to find me calmly washing out teacups. "The food, Eleanor," she hissed. "Where's the food? Are you trying to humiliate me?" I looked up at her, my eyes wide and innocent. "Why, Helen, I've been waiting for you. The drinks are served. The guests are comfortable. As for the Thanksgiving feast for our elders, I told you before, I am the junior member of this family. I am forbidden from touching the food of my elders before they have eaten. With all the senior members of the family present today, it is more important than ever that I uphold this sacred tradition. I would never dare to be so disrespectful." Helen's eyes widened in horror. "What are you saying? You haven't cooked a single thing?" I smiled brightly. "Oh, don't worry, Helen. I prepared the most wonderful demonstration of filial piety a mother-in-law could ever offer to her ancestors. Just watch." Without waiting for her to react, I walked into the center of the living room, where all the relatives were gathered. I cleared my throat, capturing everyone's attention, and spoke in a clear, respectful voice. "Uncle Robert, honored aunts, uncles, and cousins, today is our sacred Thanksgiving. As the newest members of this family, my husband and I should be the ones to carry the burden. However, my mother-in-law, Helen, is a woman of profound principle and tradition. She has taught me that a new daughter-in-law, being of the lowest rank, must not touch the feast or the dishes of her elders, in order to preserve the sanctity and dignity of the family." A murmur went through the crowd. Uncle Robert frowned, looking at Helen. I continued, my voice ringing with admiration. "Out of respect for this teaching, and to show the highest form of reverence to the Davenport legacy, my mother-in-law has decided that today, she herself will personally prepare the entire Thanksgiving feast. She said that only the hands of the family matriarch, purified by years of devotion, are worthy of preparing this sacred meal. As for me, because of my junior status, she has only permitted me to serve drinks and clear the table after everyone is finished. She is ready in the kitchen now. I invite you all to wait just a little while longer to savor the culinary artistry of the woman who keeps the flame of the Davenport family burning bright." Helen stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, the blood draining from her face. She was trapped. If she denied it, she would be repudiating the very codex she was so proud of. If she ordered me to cook, I would refuse right in front of everyone, citing her own rule. Uncle Robert's deep voice boomed. "Well, Helen, you've certainly been strict with the girl, but your devotion to this family is admirable. At this point, you'd best get started in the kitchen if we're to eat before dark. The rest of you ladies, go help your sister-in-law. But don't let the new girl touch anything. We wouldn't want her to violate the family codex and bring shame upon herself." Helen was rooted to the spot. The other women in the family, who had long tired of Helen's boastful and critical nature, seized the opportunity. That's right. Helen is the best cook on Beacon Hill. You go on, we'll just chop vegetables. You do all the important seasoning and plating to keep it sanctified, just as you taught Eleanor. Choked with rage and humiliation, Helen shot me a look that could kill. But in front of the entire family, she had no choice but to swallow her pride and march into the kitchen. The once serene kitchen became a war zone. Helen, a woman in her late 60s who hadn't cooked a major meal in years, was now single-handedly responsible for a four-course feast. She frantically sent Michael on desperate runs to the store for a turkey, for potatoes, for anything. Michael ran back and forth, his face streaked with sweat. I remained in the living room, chatting pleasantly with the relatives. Occasionally, I would stroll to the kitchen doorway and call in helpfully, "Helen, don't use too much salt. Uncle Robert has high blood pressure, you know. And Helen, you must carve the turkey evenly, or it will look so unrefined on the platter. We wouldn't want the family to think our household lacks skill." Helen, hacking away at a half-frozen turkey, was crying tears of silent fury. Her elegant cashmere was now stained with grease and smoke. She wanted to scream for my help, but every time she opened her mouth, she saw the scrutinizing eyes of her sisters-in-law, ready to remind her of the eat later rule. The meal was finally served, 2 hours late. When the platters were brought out, the mashed potatoes were lumpy, the turkey was unevenly cooked, and the gravy was cold. The relatives all shook their heads in dismay. Uncle Robert said quietly, but loud enough for Helen to hear, "You're getting older, Helen. Your strength isn't what it used to be. Why insist on these bizarre, outdated rules? If you had just let Eleanor cook, it would have been faster and better. You've only made a fool of yourself and inconvenienced the entire family." Helen stared at her plate, unable to meet anyone's eyes. After the blessing, everyone began to eat. As per the codex, I stood quietly in the corner of the room. When people invited me to join them, I would reply softly, "Oh, I couldn't possibly. My mother-in-law has taught me that the new daughter-in-law must wait until her elders have finished and the table is cleared. I will just stand here and be of service." Whispers erupted around the tables. The narrative had shifted. People were now talking about Helen's cruelty, about her imposing feudalistic rules on her daughter-in-law only to have it backfire spectacularly. Her reputation as a graceful, dignified matriarch, so carefully cultivated over decades, evaporated in a single afternoon. Helen sat at the head table, the food like ash in her mouth. She saw me, smiling politely at the guests, the smile of absolute victory. She knew that from this day forward, her precious family codex had become a death sentence for her tyrannical reign over this household. When the last guest had left, Helen collapsed onto the sofa in exhaustion. The house was silent again, but it was the silence before a revolution. I walked over to her, placed a glass of water on the table, and said softly, "You get some rest, Helen. I'll clear the dishes, and then I will eat what's left, just as you wanted." Helen didn't reply. She just closed her eyes, and bitter tears rolled down her wrinkled cheeks. The greatest battle was over. Now, it was time to establish a new world order. After that catastrophic Thanksgiving, Helen's name became the talk of Beacon Hill. The neighborhood women, who revered tradition but loved gossip even more, quickly spread the story of the Davenport family's eat later rule. Everywhere she went, from the local market to her favorite bakery, Helen felt the sting of mocking glances. Helen was a woman who valued her reputation above all else. She had spent a lifetime crafting the image of a sophisticated, old Boston woman who upheld family honor. Now, that image was shattered. People weren't praising her for cooking a holiday meal at her age. They were laughing at her for being so petty and archaic that her daughter-in-law had checkmated her with her own rules. On Monday afternoon, as Helen stepped out to go to the pharmacy, she ran into Mrs. Gable from across the street. Mrs. Gable doted on her own daughter-in-law, and the two women had always had a frosty relationship. Sweeping her porch, Mrs. Gable called out, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "Well, hello, Helen. Running your own errands today? Where's Eleanor? Can't have you exerting yourself. Or is she busy waiting for you to finish your lunch before she's allowed to leave her room?" Helen's face flushed. She clutched her purse, trying to keep her voice even. "She's at work. She has important business to attend to. I can handle a few errands myself. You needn't worry." Mrs. Gable chuckled. "Oh, I'm not worried. I just feel for you. The whole neighborhood is saying how clever you were in choosing a daughter-in-law. A real sharp CFO. She follows your orders so perfectly. You tell her to eat later, and she stands and waits. You tell her she can't touch the food, and she lets you wrestle with a 20-pound turkey all by yourself. You are truly blessed, Helen, to have raised such an obedient daughter-in-law that the mother-in-law ends up in tears in her own kitchen. Speechless. Helen walked away as fast as she could, as if fleeing the stinging words. But at the pharmacy, she overheard a group of women whispering, "Can you believe it? In this day and age, making your daughter-in-law eat leftovers? I thought the Davenports were high class, but it turns out they're just backward. But that new wife of theirs is no fool." She turned the tables on Helen and gave her a lesson she'll never forget. The gossip was like 1,000 tiny needles, piercing Helen's pride. She realized that the authority she had wielded for so long had become a public joke. She returned home, slammed the door, and sat in the silent, empty living room, staring at the portrait of her late husband. She had tried to uphold the family honor, but why had the result been so disastrous? Meanwhile, I continued my work at the firm, unperturbed. I knew public opinion was on my side, but I took no joy in it. My goal was not to humiliate my mother-in-law, but to break the irrational chains that were strangling my life and my marriage. I understood that once her illusory prestige was gone, Helen would have no choice but to face reality and accept change. The whispers of the neighborhood were a powerful weapon, but the awakening that comes from failure was what I truly hoped for her. On Wednesday evening, the atmosphere in the house was heavier than ever. After another silent dinner where Helen had to clear her own meager plate while I stood by, she finally broke. She slammed her hand lightly on the table, her voice hoarse. "Michael, Eleanor, in the living room. We need to talk." Michael looked at me, his eyes weary and anxious. He had lost weight. We sat opposite Helen on the antique sofa set. She looked years older, her sharp eyes now dull with exhaustion. After a long silence, she looked at me, her voice devoid of its former authority, filled only with bitterness. "You won, Eleanor. You used my own codex to turn me into a monster, a laughingstock for the entire family and all of Beacon Hill. I never imagined a new bride could be so calculating and so resilient." I remained calm. "With all due respect, Helen, this was never about winning or losing. I told you from the beginning. I was simply executing your rules with the utmost seriousness. If the result of those rules is public ridicule, then the fault lies not with me, but with the rules themselves. They are incompatible with modern life and devoid of human compassion." Michael finally spoke, his voice choked with emotion. "Mom, please, I can't take this anymore. I come home from a long day wanting peace, and instead I'm terrified to walk through my own front door. You forced my wife into a corner, but in the end, you and I are the ones who are suffering. I love both of you, but if this continues, I'm going to break." Helen sighed, a long, shuddering breath. She looked from her son to me. The loneliness and fatigue had finally cracked her resolve. I knew the time was right. I took a neatly typed document from my briefcase. I placed it on the table and slid it toward her. "What is this?" she asked. "This, Helen," I replied, "is a modern household agreement. I've drafted it based on the rights and responsibilities of every member of this family. If we are going to continue living under one roof without resentment, we need a new set of rules. Rules based on mutual respect and equality, not on unconditional submission." Helen picked up the paper, her hand trembling slightly. She began to read the articles I had spent all night carefully phrasing. Michael leaned in to read as well, and I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. The agreement wasn't long, but it was concise and airtight, the work of a CFO. Helen read slowly, the only sound in the room the ticking of the grandfather clock. Article 1. I began to explain. A complete abolishment of all archaic rules regarding eating separately or in order of seniority. In this family, all members are equal. Mealtimes are for gathering. We will sit at one table and share the same food. There is no hierarchy at the dinner table, only family. Helen frowned but didn't object. Article 2. Finances. Michael and I will contribute a fair and transparent amount for household expenses. This will cover groceries, utilities, and the cost of a weekly cleaning service to handle the heavy chores. You will not have to work so hard, but you will also not use that money to control our lives. Article 3. Household chores, I continued, emphasizing the point. Cooking and cleaning will be shared. On weekdays, when I get home late, I will handle the cleanup after dinner. Michael will be responsible for grocery runs or picking up takeout in the mornings. On weekends, I will cook the meals, and you will be my consultant, sharing your experience, not issuing commands. The final article made her pause the longest. Respect for privacy. You will not enter our bedroom without permission. In turn, we will respect your private space. All feedback on lifestyles must be communicated directly and honestly, not enforced through an outdated codex. I looked her directly in the eye, my voice firm but forgiving. Helen, if you sign this agreement, I promise to be the most devoted daughter-in-law I can be. I will care for you when you are sick and help make the Davenport family proud through our success and happiness. But if you do not sign, then Michael and I will be moving out tomorrow. I have already found an apartment near my office. Michael will have to choose, stay here and be served by you in solitude, or come with his wife and build a life of freedom. Michael squeezed my hand tightly and looked at his mother, his eyes pleading. Mom, please, let us just be your children. Don't make us choose. Seeing the determination in my eyes and the exhaustion in her son's, the fortress around Helen's heart finally crumbled. She realized that if she clung to her old ways, she would lose not just her reputation, but her only son, the source of her lifelong pride. She leaned back, breathing heavily. She looked around the historic home where she had spent her life, and understood that a flame without air will either die out or burn the house down. Her archaic rules were suffocating them all. I always thought, she said, her voice trembling, that I was doing what was best for the family, to teach you tradition. I never knew I was making you both so miserable. The neighborhood can laugh at me, I can bear that. But if Michael leaves me, there would be no point in living. Helen picked up a pen from the table. She looked at me one last time, as if seeking confirmation that I would truly treat her well after everything that had happened. I gave her a small, sincere nod. Helen signed the agreement. Her handwriting was shaky, but clear. As the signature was completed, I saw Michael let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a week. He rushed to his mother and hugged her, tears welling in his eyes. Thank you, Mom. You'll see, we're going to be so much happier now. I stood up, walked over, and took Helen's other hand. It was the first time I had touched her without a defensive barrier between us. Get some rest. Helen, tomorrow morning, I'll wake up early and make that creamy corn chowder you like. We'll have breakfast together before I go to work. Helen said nothing, but she gently squeezed my hand. Her capitulation was not a surrender to an enemy, but a surrender to reason and to love. The old, tattered codex would now be just a bad memory, replaced by new rules written with affection and understanding. That night, Beacon Hill was quiet, but inside the Davenport house, a new chapter had truly begun. That Sunday morning, the sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For the first time in years, the Davenport kitchen was filled with laughter and the rich aroma of fresh cooking. No more takeout containers or instant ramen. I had gone to the market early, selecting the freshest corn and ingredients. Helen came downstairs in a simple housecoat, her hair tied back. She no longer sat waiting on the sofa with a scowl. She walked over to the sink where I was washing herbs. Let me do that, she said softly. You need to stir the chowder constantly, or it will burn on the bottom. I smiled and handed her the herbs. Thank you, Helen. I was going to add a little extra ginger for you. It's good for your stomach. She nodded, her wrinkled hands expertly picking the leaves. Michael came in with the Sunday paper and stopped dead in the doorway, staring at the scene. A huge grin spread across his face. Wow, with 2 master chefs in the kitchen today, I think I'm going to have to eat 3 bowls. At 9 a.m., breakfast was served at the main dining table. For the first time, 3 chairs were pulled in close together. I invited Helen to sit at the head of the table. Then I sat down next to Michael. No one was standing, no one was waiting, and no one was eating leftovers. Helen tasted a spoonful of the chowder. She nodded slowly. It's good. The girl knows how to cook. A little light on the pepper, though. I laughed. I'll make a note for next time. Eat up. It will give you strength. The meal was warm and relaxed. We talked about Michael's work, about plans to replant the small garden out back, and about inviting Uncle Robert over next weekend to show him how much things had changed. Helen occasionally placed a piece of crusty bread in my bowl, and then in Michael's. The lines on her face seemed softer, less severe. When we finished, I stood to clear the plates, but Helen stopped me. I'll get it. You and Michael go take a walk. It's a beautiful day. You two haven't had any time to yourselves, have you? I can handle this. I looked at Michael, and he gave me a playful wink. We walked out hand in hand, feeling the first hints of spring in the Boston air. I knew life would still have its challenges, but now we had a solid foundation to stand on. Equality and love. My war had ended not with punishment, but with reconciliation. I had used my mind to defend myself, but in the end, I used my heart to save my family. The house on Beacon Hill was no longer a cage of archaic tradition, but a true home, where everyone had found their rightful place in the light of civility and compassion. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. It was, perhaps, the most successful balance sheet I had ever reconciled in my life. The one that balanced personal integrity with family happiness.